for renewing your membership this year. That keeps our lights on and made our research project possible. We really appreciate that. So this is the way it's going to be. We're going to have a presentation of the research, and then we're going to have a panel discussion with a lot of brain power up here to critique it and add some commentary, and then we'll do our brokers roundtable before we run away back to work. So our presenter is a well-known individual who majored in finance and economics from Indiana University. He has a 23-year commercial real estate career here in Tucson. Mostly it was in the banking business until last year. He made a career change and joined the dark side, the equity side of the commercial real estate business. He's involved with numerous organizations, but he's been on our board for 7 years. He's the past president, and I think our board would agree that this report would not happen without his involvement, and I'd like everyone to stand and thank Paul Kraft. Who is now CEO of Clover Company.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone. Let's see if I can get technology down here. All right, so today I want to take you back in time a little bit. Back to the age before the internet, before electronic media, before the days of CoStar reports, and before CBRE, Cushman Wakefield published electronic reports every quarter. Back into the early 70s. And there was a group of professionals in Tucson that decided that we weren't getting any kind of market coverage of data. There wasn't good information flow. And so that group of real estate professionals were local. They put together a little board. They raised some money amongst themselves. They went to banks, they went to title companies and their business friends, raised money, and then they went and negotiated a deal with the University of Arizona to put together a study. And many of you remember this study, the METLIS, the Metropolitan Land Use Study, that ended up covering eventually every product type in our market in terms of occupancy and inventory of that product type. It was apartments, office, industrial, retail. It published itself every quarter. It was an expensive report to do. And along came electronic media, the change with CoStar, the internet information age, and then came the Great Recession. The end of that was that report concluded in 2010. And since that time, the Real Estate Research Council has kind of been reinventing itself. And we've been focusing the last 5 years on information through our programming. You know, our goal is always, and our mission statement is to provide you that relevant information to help you make decisions in the real estate community. And so what I have today is our first annual study that we're going to provide you. And we're going to do an annual study every year, obviously. We call it an annual study. And that's going to rotate into a different topic. The first topic is multifamily. Okay. The objective of the report is to study Class A product. This isn't a study of every single multifamily product type. It's focused exclusively on the Class A product, and particularly on multifamily projects that are over 40 units. My job today, within 20 to 30 minutes, is to summarize a 28-page report with 22 data charts explaining various calculations in that time zone. You can grade me at the end. When you read the report, it's broken down into 3 segments. There's a historical look at the data, and that's 2000 to 2013. And because this report just got finished, just hot off the press, at the same time, the 2014 information came in. Lucinda was good enough to grab that information and incorporate it into the middle of the report to give us a quick look at the most recent history. So when you eventually read the report, you're going to see it broken in these 3 segments. And then the report moves into the future, today through the next 5 years. My presentation today will be somewhat in this fashion. So researchers agree on one thing. In general, housing demand, whether you call housing demand generically for apartments or single-family housing, has some quantifiable measures that are related to it. There's a pretty good measure that we can use to show over the long term how these things are related. And those things are population growth, household formation rates, and employment growth. And this study looks at these things extensively. Now, the thing is about these data points is that they're not the whole story. And you'll see in this presentation, there's more to the story than just the data. There's other influencing factors. And I'll circle back to that. But we're going to go through these points first. All right. I've violated the rule of information on a PowerPoint here. There's a lot of data in this slide, but this is just an example of the quality and level of detail in this report. So the key things I want us to look at is the employment and the population change. And then over here on the far right column, we've got total households and household growth. And so this is a historical look back in the report of that time period. Now, I could add a few more columns to this table, but I ran out of space. So bear with me. I moved it to the next page. And basically, I picked up on the table from the last page over here on the far left. Now, there's a concept here I want to get past. And we don't have time to unpack all the formulas, but I don't want you to look at the table anymore. I want you to look at me. So I'm going to explain this. And here's the concept. You've got a pool of population in a point in time. And then that point in time, that year goes to another year. That pool of people changes. There's a population growth. So let's take that pool of people and we'll move over here. In that pool of people, we know that in Tucson, the household formation rate is 2.45. So we can take that pool of all people that grew and move over here and convert it into households. Now in the households, what do we know? We know households are you're either gonna buy a house or you're gonna rent something. We're interested in what? People that rent. So let's move over with the people that rent. We keep boiling down this population. Now we've got the renters, and we know something about them. There's two things. They either rent in a home, renting single-family homes, or they rent in, can everybody hear me okay? Is that better?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. They either rent a home, or they rent an apartment. We're interested in what? The apartment piece. So we know that long-term trend. We can take that pool of people and move over here. And so basically what this table is doing is exactly that with the historical data. We've got total households, new renter households, and multifamily demand. And that's what we've charted here. Now at the very bottom, you'll see that over that time period, based upon those formulas, there's about 17,000 units in demand based on that formula. And if we look also over that time period, multifamily permits, if we use that as a supply picture, there's 11,500. It's just a hint of pent-up demand in that chart. This is the quick picture of more recent history. Remember I said things came hot off the press. This data kind of rolled in just as the report was being finished. And basically the estimates are there's 10,400 new residents, 4,245 new households. And again, we kind of boil that down into 1,400 roughly new rental households that should migrate out of that population change that we just went through. This is an interesting slide out of our presentation or out of our report that kind of looks at the existing demographic of just renters. So we're just looking at the rental population. And when we look at that for the Pima County, Tucson area, what we found is that 25% of that population earns $50,000 or more in family income. And what that tells us is when we look at the average rent for Class A product, that these people can afford to live in the Class A product that's delivered to market based upon the rent income qualification ratios. And that's just kind of a footnote we can circle back to. This table tells us a couple things, and it adds two things to the prior table a couple slides ago. And I apologize, there's a lot of data here. It's hard to condense this in and absorb it, but I'll highlight a couple things. The 2014 information at the bottom was added, and then the far right, what's happened is we've taken that population that I walked us through a few minutes ago, and we've extracted out the 25%, assuming that that household change and those apartment population, just kind of like the no-brainer, that if it follows the trend in history, then if 25% of those folks have the same income distribution as what we found, then it's pretty easy to show that there's 524 units that would be absorbed into the new Class A product. This is a picture of the supply. So what we just talked about is, this is demand, okay? I'm going to switch. Now we're going to talk quickly about supply. Kind of the same time period, okay? In fact, the same time period. And this is what's been delivered. These are units that were delivered and put in the market, a total of 1,800 units. As of the fourth quarter, the performance of that, excluding 2 projects that were still in lease-up. So the majority of this is performing at a vacancy rate of 7%, fairly stabilized, and averaging $110 a square foot in rents. Now catch this. I just said 524, but we've absorbed a whole lot more. So there's something else at play. We've got something that I term secondary demand drivers. Here's another picture of a possible scenario. People just may not want to own a house for the labor of it. They may want to retire in Tucson and live in a luxury rental and not have to deal with the hustle and bustle of maintaining your house, especially if they're snowbirds and they want to leave, they don't want to worry about the house. So, you know, someone, young professional who's concerned about their career, they don't have time to deal with the house. They want to spend their time relaxing in these resort-style pools. If anyone hasn't been to some of this new product, it's truly amazing. I remember years ago when my wife and I rented an apartment, it was nothing like what they have. They have home theater, they have these huge theaters, they have these huge resort-style pools with fountains squirting out of them, and saunas, and athletic gyms that are better than most of the gyms that I have memberships with. So they're just truly a community on its own. So these secondary apartment demand generators are basically, you know, household formation changes and unbundling. And so here's a topic that the report touches on quite a bit, is that you've got a lot of people that are bundled together. And like the student a couple slides ago living with the parents, you're getting out of college, you don't have the money to really get your own place, so you're living with your parents. You even have a number of households where there's 2 families living together. Why? Because somebody's underemployed. They don't have the job that they used to have, and maybe they lost their house in a foreclosure or whatever the case. And so until they get that next wave or the next income rise that gets them out of that, they're kind of bundled together. And there's a lot of research that talks about this unbundling effect that's going to go on in the market. And those people are going to disperse, and they're either going to go in to buy a house or they're going to rent an apartment. And we have other perceived things, such as home ownership just simply isn't viewed the same way as an investment as it used to be. And we have just simply renters by choice. So I'm going to take a moment just to talk about one of those influencing factors and trends. A lot of the research shows that the population demographic, the millennials, and the population demographic of the baby boomers, which you can see the green shaded areas represent that population. And for our community, that is a very large population, and those people very much are trending more to rent than the prior populations. Huge tailwinds to the apartment community. This is a tough one to explain, so bear with me. So when we look at the existing stock of apartments, I'm going to say that the existing stock actually creates demand for Class A. What? How's that work? Consider this. 87% of the multifamily product is over 15 years old in our market. 3/4, 76%, is over 25 years old of our market. Art Wadman, who's not here with us today, he did a study a couple years ago where he compared Albuquerque, Phoenix, El Paso, other markets in the Southwest, and he looked at the inventory stock and he looked at the age. And he found a pretty big gap between our market and theirs, meaning we have much older stock. So here's how this works. And I like to use extreme examples to kind of give you the analogy. So let's just make an assumption there's no population change. There's a year-to-year, no population change, no employment change, no growth, just everything's static. Ceteris paribus, you know the old economic model. So there's this change that doesn't occur, but there's the same population. Now let's make the assumption that there's this rental stock of everything that's out there is 40 or 50 years old. Nothing's been built. And you know in that population there's a number of those people, in fact in our population it's 25%, that can afford Class A product. Isn't it reasonable to conclude that if you bring something to market, it's going to absorb? Some people just like that new car smell. Here's a part of the report that talks about the Class A inventory. This is a list of everything that is considered Class A in our market. There's a total of 8,442 units here. There's 44 properties, and the performance of this data set is that it has an average vacancy rate of 7% and an average rent per square foot of 96 cents. This is what I term a performing population of product. So clearly the market at this point is healthy. Kind of a comment that we talked about in our research committee and debated a bit with Lucinda. There was a number of, I'll call, dissenting opinions within our committee that look at this report and look at some of these properties and believe that they are really B property. In fact, a number of them, when you look at like other markets, if you went to Phoenix or another major market, they would probably be considered a B product. But for our market, we're going to consider them A. But the point there is that when we talk about age of inventory, even though there's this amount, and this, by the way, this amount represents 12% of the entire stock, okay? But there's a number of these that are probably going to slip into the B class product. Here's another busy slide. And I only put this up here to show, this is just more of an example of the level of detail. And the highlights here are, you know, at the very top, we've got current leasing. These are projects that are in leasing effort. You can see the report covers all of these projects. And then it talks about, you know, future leasing, things that are under construction and process. And then at the very bottom, it talks about what's planned. Very thorough report. If you're making a decision about multifamily, we believe this should be very helpful to you to see what's on the horizon, how it's performed, what's recently come out. And then let's look at the most recent absorptions. We'll just kind of take a section of that last slide and move it into here. And what you can see here is these are the projects that were in process of absorbing in 2014. And, you know, let's say we're all friends here. A lot of my friends, our friends, are in the room that are here. We got Avila Preserve at the top, Avila River, Roger Carver, who's going to be our panelist speaking in a few minutes. We've got Encantada Dove Mountain, HSL, local. The Herbert was downtown, Peach Properties, Ron Schwabe's here, did that with Halua. He's going to be one of our panelists. We've got Place at Creekside, Ross McAllister also here on our board, who's going to be on our panel. And Encantada Steam Pump, another HSL product, Mark Taylor, and Miramani, Steve Quinlan, and Chris Kemmerly. I think I saw Steve, or Chris, yeah, Steve Quinlan's here. So one of the things that just kind of grabbed me is that in this market, that all but one of these are local. So we don't have, you know, you go to some markets, and I've done lending and underwriting in other markets, and it's pretty hard to get a grasp on what's going to go on. All these guys know each other, they all talk, right? So we kind of all know what's going on in our market, and that's one of the nice things about a little bit smaller market is knowing what's happening. But, you know, again, Lucinda did a good job of laying out, you know, all the details of these, where they're located, and I'll just point out that there's 743 units left. Those are units that are carried into this year, okay? So these are all delivered, they weren't all absorbed. We're bringing that supply forward into this year. And I'll touch back on that in a minute. And so, you know, she's got a monthly unit pace, and then we've got projections out by quarter of how these are expected to absorb. This is just another excerpt from the study showing you the units that were delivered in 14. The last were absorbing, so you had some things last slide that were constructed in 13 and 12 that we're still absorbing in 14. This is what was fresh. These are the newest deals to the market. So here, what we're talking about is supply. This is now we've moved from looking at history and looking at recent history. We're going to kind of bring it all together, and we're going to look at what's going to happen going forward. And so this is what we know is announced and planned to be developed in the future. There's always things that will pop up and be on the list that we didn't see. Some of these might fall off, but for now, this is what we know. And all those units built, if all that happens in the next 5 years, we've got 2,164 units coming to market. Right down here. That's the total. And remember I said just in the last slide that we're 743 units. Those are the carry forwards for our total of 2,907 units to be supplied to our market over the next 5 years. So supply, demand. Okay, that was the future of the supply. Here's the future for the demand. And we're going to shift back into that primary demand drivers. We're not talking about those other influencing factors that have like multicollinearity to the primary drivers. But these, this shows us as based on the Eller School and various other economic forecasts Lucinda went out and found. She's put together the forecast for our population growth. And again, boiled that down into the projected rental household growth. And, you know, what we see here is that the total projected renter household growth over that period on average is going to be 1,883. This slide is going to bring it all together. This slide brings it all together for us. And again, it's the same types of data that we had before. We've got the employment increases, we've got population increase, households, new renter households, new multifamily demand, and then we've got the boiled down version based upon the income qualification to get us to 1,836 units. These are what I call low-hanging fruit, okay, to be absorbed over the next 5 years. Wait a minute, Paul, you said we've got more units. We've got 2,907 coming. That's the problem. Well, okay, so if we look back, we absorbed on our model 524 units in the last 3 years, but we actually delivered 1,800 in that earlier slide, and we've absorbed all that pretty well. Now, the absorption rates have probably changed, and people who own these projects can see that and know that they're closer to it. But again, there's still going to be absorption from the existing stock. So our conclusions in the study are that it appears there could be an oversupply in the market based upon that primary demand model by itself. I didn't talk a lot about job growth and jobs. Jobs are critical. Michael Guinan, he's here. He's going to talk about that after our presentation with TRIO. But the report, when you read it, there's several pages and several tables dedicated and laying out employment, what's happened recently, and what's expected to happen. And it's really a great job Lucinda did on the employment piece of that. The northwest quadrant of the region is what we've noticed in the slides. Go back. So Oro Valley, Northwest, we look at that as the same. You look here, you know, what's planned, Foothills, Oro Valley, Marana, a lot of this is Northwest. And one of the things that we saw is that on units that were delivered, the Herbert, and it's not on this slide because it was delivered a couple years ago, but the Herbert, downtown, Casa Presidio, the Town West did over on Fort Lowell, Riverside Crossing HSL did over on River at Thornydale, and then a smaller project that didn't make it on this list that I was part of with Art Wadlin and Rob Kaler downtown. They did the small, luxury, larger project. All 4 of those absorbed their units like unbelievably fast, like 30 days, like sell out. People were waiting to get into those units. Those are what we consider core properties. And one thing that when you look at all the data and you start to step back and look at it, there's an awful lot of product in Marana, Northwest. Look at all of this. There seems to be a pretty heavy concentration in the northwest side of town. You know, when we talk about primary demand drivers, we talk about it based upon the whole population, the whole region. So we're kind of watching that. So just kind of the flash, hey, there's a lot on the northwest side. So although it's a nice community, it's a desirable place for people to live, but it is noteworthy, and the report talks about that. The core market, which I talked about, those units, those 4 projects that absorb quickly, the report concludes that the belief is that is undersupplied. We all know the challenges with that. We all know the challenges with trying to do something in the core market in terms of zoning and getting things done feasibly. But anyway, that is my presentation. I think I made it in about 20 minutes. So with that, I'm going to invite up Jim Marion, who's going to introduce our panelists, and Byron Bridges, who's going to be the moderator for the next part of our section, the Q&A. So, gentlemen.
Thank you, Paul. Can I have all our panelists, Kim, Roger, Alan, Ross, and Ron, come on up while I introduce you so we can move quickly here. Alan's got to bug out early at 9 o'clock. Let's reserve the last seat here. Since he's leaving early, if his deal closes he's working on, he's all going to share his commission with all of us, and we appreciate that. So we'll excuse him. So quickly, as they're taking their seats here, to my immediate right is Kim Finch, and she is sole owner of Nicolosi and Finch. She's the immediate past president of the Arizona Multifamily Housing Association. Their company is a third-party manager with about 3,200 units under management in Tucson, Sierra Vista, and Casa Grande. Roger Carver, in the middle here, told me this morning that he joined this fine organization in 1978 when Lou McGinnis was the chairman. And he doesn't look a day over 40, incredible. Speaking of founders, I'm going to go out of order here a second. Jim Sellers, please stand up. Jim was one of the founding members that found our organization. Thank you, Jim. He was one of those that had the vision. We appreciate that. So Roger, as you all know, is president of Airy Development. His brand is the Airy Rental Homes that he has, and he personally has developed over 4,000 units in Tucson, Phoenix, and is now looking to expand in both Texas and Colorado. Alan Mendensberg is a very well-known apartment broker here with Picor. It's great to have him here, and is our only broker on the panel, so that's great. Russ McAllister, to my far right, president of MC Companies. His company has a portfolio of 8 multifamily units that he oversees. I'm sorry, 8,000 apartment units there. Very top-heavy organization. They're 100% leased though, so that's good. 3,000 units here in Tucson, so it's good to have his perspective, even though he's in Texas and Oklahoma, all over the place, and he's been developing since 1985. Ron Schwabe, Peach Properties, I think we know him. He's been developing here since '83 with a focus in the core downtown in both commercial and residential properties. So I'm going to turn things over to Roger. Byron, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much for your coming up here. These questions are taken from the Pima County Real Estate Research Council Research Committee in no particular order, and if you feel that if you want to answer the question differently or change it around, be my guest. So and anybody welcome to pipe up, and if you don't talk, then I'll pick on you. So the first question is, was there anything presented this morning from our annual study that you found surprising? And my next question will be a little bit more loaded, but if there anything from the study that you found surprising? That means we had a great presentation, Paul. Okay, goodbye.
I think I'll. By the way, this thing on?
Yeah.
The lady next to me is Kim Finch, not Finch. The recent president of Nicolosi since Nancy's retirement, so she's the queen over there, so we know. I think the thing that surprised me the most was the I was actually surprised at how good the projected demand is going to be. And yeah, I'm concerned, I mean, we all have to be concerned about supply, but as we all know, and all of us have been doing this a long time, we always, you know, if we can take a good market, then all of us who are in the business and real professional about it do our best to screw it up as soon as possible. So we're all building like crazy, we're all making that happen. I actually was very heartened to see how positive that future demand is, because I think right now, and at least our experience is it's slowing. You know, our new product is not doing as well as it did 2 years ago. And I think, but as usual, you know, that's not we don't see that as a long-term problem, and so I'm real happy to see that we think there's as much demand as there is.
I'd like to comment on that. Two things. Number one, I think there was a pin-up demand. That's why maybe that you were doing better 2 years before than today. And also in terms of future demand, that's based upon population projections, which are pretty static. So if you feel that Tucson can project more, I mean, to have a greater population growth over the next 5 years, then that demand model is going to go up. If you feel that it's down, it's not going to project as much. And so it's a very basic model, but that's a good comment. Thank you. My next question would be, do you believe the market will be oversupplied if the projected number of units, the 2907, are brought to market as opposed to the 1,800 in demand? Alan, you look like you want to.
I think the major issue that we're having here is this all ties back to job growth. And all these projections are great, but it comes down to Tucson getting high-paying jobs to the marketplace. We've been downsizing Raytheon, which is a huge concern for us, and we're adding it with call centers. And you saw the graph up there. We have an overwhelming supply of under $25,000, median household income, and that's affecting the new product that's coming out because they're building high-end product. You know, they're building the $1,300, $1,400 two-bedroom units, the $800, $900 one-bedroom units. These cannot be, we cannot build these unless we have high-paying jobs to the marketplace.
Sorry, one more comment on that. The 50,000 year annual income is kind of what our demand is based upon. To be the suite level, those 50,000 above can afford a Class A multifamily. Do you think that's realistic, or do you think 50,000 is too low, too high?
I just don't think we have the sample size right now. We've just started adding this Class A product. I can tell you over the last 4 years, the average rent in Tucson's gone up about, I think, $6 in the last 4 years. However, we've added a lot of high-end inventory to this figure. So if you take out that high-end inventory, we're seeing stagnant, maybe even declining rent for a lot of the properties out there. And so this is, we got a lot of questions in the marketplace, and we're in a wait-and-see approach. I think it's too hard to call right now.
So my comment to that, my company manages one of the properties that is considered an A property on that list, which it was built in 1998, and I'm thinking that is not comparable to the new product that is out there. It is apples and oranges, so maybe we need to start looking at how we're rating our apartment communities, and it's A+, A-, and be a little bit more finite in that. And our A property up in Oro Valley, we're having to do some major renovations to the kitchens just to make them compete. But one thing that I saw in the presentation that actually made me kind of excited was 75% of the people make less than $50,000, and that's the most of the product that I manage, and that's most of the product in Tucson. So I think that bodes well for the other product. And I would agree, our rents are still not up to 2007 rent levels on the B, C, and D product. So we're flat, we're moving very slowly and increasing our rents, Where we're improving is bleeding off concessions.
Thank you. One thing I want to point out is in the report, Lucinda did a very good job of doing different demographics of different people changing lifestyles. And when you look at the report, I would encourage you to look at the different kind of the lifestyle changes that can affect going forward. So my next question is how has your community performed? How has your community performance differed from what you projected in terms of rents, absorption, demographic profile?
I think there's a lot of anomalies that we've experienced. Every time that we think we see the pattern, we start a property in a different location, we see a very different pattern. And so it's really tricky to take data sets and do a string stretch projection. I'm also fond of saying that these averages are okay, but averages are like putting your hand in the freezer and your foot in the oven, and on average you're pretty comfortable. And in the multifamily area, it's cool to talk about total units in a property or total units in an area of town, but when you're actually leasing them and managing them, you find that you can be 100% leased in the one bedrooms and 50% leased in the 3 bedrooms, and the 2s might be somewhere in between. You go across town and that's flipped. And so the next challenge is to take the data and present it the way that the consumer sees it. Somebody who's in the market for a 1 bedroom is rarely looking and comparing 3 bedrooms, and they might give a little thought to a 2 bedroom, but the 1 bedroom market is a market of its own. And so if you break all this data down, you can look and say, okay, so this subset is probably going to do really well. That one's going to have some challenges. And then a year later, something occurs in the economy or demographically, and that starts to flip. So it's really tricky.
Thank you. I have a follow-up to that. Just keep it because I have a follow-up. What subset do you think will increase the most in terms of the renter, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, or over the next 5 years?
What I'm seeing is that in the Northwest, the 1 bedrooms are really solid. We wish we had more, and I don't know if it's just because I'm an old guy now, but it's hard for me to comprehend that we get over $900 for a 1 bedroom, and our 1 bedroom is only 635 square feet. So and the fact that we are raising rent regularly, saying we're trying to find where we meet the market, how much will they really pay on that 1 home that we have available? Meanwhile, the 2s are sort of okay, and in the Northwest, the 3s are really soft. In the Northeast, the 3s are really solid. Know if that answered.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Since you have the microphone, would you like to?
Yeah, I guess I better say something. Yeah. In the downtown, in that little world, I think it kind of breaks all the rules. It's Ross and I did for years the large projects in the suburbs and different cities and that sort of thing. And there's the ebbs and flows, and just from a bystander, it looks like the Northwest is sort of getting a little bit tipped out right now, and other areas are maybe better. In the downtown, it just breaks all the rules. I mean, basically, there's the unit mix is kind of irrelevant. It's if you can have a studio, a 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom. If you could have a 3 bedroom, it'd be better, of course. But there's scarcity of land, and there's really no new product down there. When we did 1 North 5th in 2008, we leased up in 2.5 months, 96 units. We were getting close on the upper floor units, close to $2 a square foot for probably finishes the level to maybe a B minus. And the Herbert has kind of been the same experience. That's a little notched up as far as level. I wouldn't call it an A by any means, and we're averaging about $1.80 a square foot there. And they are smaller units and that sort of thing too, but it's the demographics are wide. I mean, we have people from the Air Force Base, the people that work at the Ritz in the Northwest. I mean, people that work down on the Border Patrol on the borders. I mean, it's a real mix. Less than 20% student. And, and obviously the cost of entry in the market is the thing that kind of keeps it that way. I mean, there's few sites, it's expensive to build, just construction staging, everything is, your vertical construction, but, to talk about this in a room full of realtors is kind of, dangerous, but I mean, it definitely, if you can find a site downtown or in and around the downtown, the market it just doesn't fit any of these charts, really.
Thank you.
One more question.
Go for it.
Tucson, and actually all the markets we're in are in particular, but I think Tucson in particular is very sub-market driven. And it's very supply sensitive. So when you do stuff like throw 780 units on Oracle, that's gonna cause us a problem. And I saw it in the, when we saw it in the 80s when Joe Friedheim built 300 units after 300 units after 300 units on Pantano Road. That market suffered. Everybody suffers when there's supply. That's just the way it is. The other comment that I would make is that if you call a property manager and say what unit is most in demand, they'll tell you that the one that's most in demand is the last one they rented. So they always want what we don't have. So the key to, Roger will tell you this, and the key to trying to figure out how to develop an apartment community is to try and find a balance between the 1s, 2s, and 3s that's going to last long term. The other, you can't, in particular in Tucson, because if you're building, other than Roger who can build and sell and make money in 24 hours, the rest of us have to hold on for 8 or 10 years and hope to God that we can catch it on the upswing someplace. If you're building for a spot time and trying to hit a cycle, you're going to lose. Long term, you're going to lose. So I think it's really important that, and I think what everybody does is they do a good job for building for a sustainable model that can stand the test of time. And that's really, I think, the issue.
So here's a personal question, and maybe it's a little proprietary. When you're looking at site selection, looking for a new community, do you look at demographics? What do you do?
It's land price, totally.
Hey, here we go. See that? So for my next question. And I know the answer to this is jobs and high growth, but let's try to be a little more creative. What's the most important economic driver to drive demand for apartment leasing to get us over some of the humps we may see in the future?
Jobs. It's jobs and income, that's all it is. I mean, this business is all about income, jobs and income. You have job growth, everything's fine.
So going back to our supply and demand study, that's what it's based upon. It's based upon population coming in. If we can get in good jobs and get in those strong jobs, then your lives are better. If we can't, then your lives are not better. Let's see. We have.
Let me ask you just one question. What were the assumptions made on job growth predictions, forecasts?
What are the assumptions made on the job growth forecast? It's just taken from the Eller study, the Eller projections, the static projections, population growth from those studies that they do. We didn't project any of those, we just took those and put them into the model. Here's another loaded question. It's been stated many times that Tucson ranks at the bottom of apartment rents in the West. This is Paul's question, so don't blame me. What do you think is the dynamic behind this low rents, and do you see this changing in the future?
I have a feeling about that. It seems like it's a trick question because we have one of the oldest stocks of apartment inventory, so naturally we would have lower rents. And so it's hard to even up the apples and oranges comparison. You might ask the question, why do we have such a high percentage of older apartments? And I think it's helpful to point out that we also have a very old stock of all housing. I grew up in Midtown here, back in the 60s and 70s. And I think I saw a report that said something like 75 or 80% of Tucson's homes are 50 years old. So when you compare us to markets like Phoenix, where you look at the inventory of apartments built in the last 10 years or 15 years, the really high percentage of their available inventory is relatively new A product. So when you say, how do our average rents in Tucson compare to Phoenix, for instance, it seems like we're miserable. But it's really not apples to apples. And I think on the plus side, our home builders here were phenomenal in their ability for decades to produce relatively close-in, high-quality, brand-new housing and get people in at terms that just made you want to be a homeowner. So I think there's just, you've got to define the comparison to make any sense of it.
Alan, looks like you need a...
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I have a lot of owners that call me up and are contemplating whether to renovate these 60s, 70s buildings. And you've been a few success stories, but most of the time it's turning into failure for a lot of the people that have gone through. You know, they'll do these extensive renovations, but in only certain sub-markets you'll actually see significant rental growth, potential. We'll have, I got people on golf links in 29th Street wanting to do these renovations, and they do them, and they increase their rents by about $15, but they put in a ton of capital, and it's just a lot of failed tries. And I think, a lot of the owners are starting to realize that, what they have is what they have, and it's not in their best interest to add to these buildings. And then you start seeing a lot of built-up deferred maintenance, because with a flat rental market and with the utility costs and expenses going up, the NOIs are shrinking for a lot of these owners. And when their NOIs are shrinking, they're definitely hesitant to fix the roof or do this and do that. So we have a lot of old and broken down buildings that are in the marketplace, which is a huge concern. And you can't really bulldoze them and build new because they're not in these locations that would justify it.
And I have a response to that as well. The apartments are now, even though rents are flat, the occupancies are increasing. So we are getting some additional revenue. And when I see pro formas with the capitals at $250 or $300 a door, I'm thinking that's not really realistic, because we didn't do anything capital-wise unless we absolutely had to when the market was really, really bad, 2008 through 2011. Now we're starting to do a lot of those things, the pool resurfacing, the parking lots, some landscaping upgrades that we had to put off because the funds just weren't there. So when you're doing a pro forma and you're saying, the capitals are $250 to $300 a door, you probably need to take a look at what did they do over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And if they hadn't done that, then that's not really a realistic number.
Just anecdotally, everybody wants to be Austin, right? We have 2 properties in Austin. We have one, West Village, is built in the mid-'80s. It actually was built by John Conley. Remember him, the guy who was the governor who was killed, or shot when killed. And we did renovations on there. We did $4,000 a unit, which was nothing. Appliances, little floor covering, recoated the cabinets, fixtures, the usual suspects. We raised the rents there on average $127 a unit. And the property is what, 94% occupied? So we thought, that's a great idea. We have Terra Rica up here on the northwest that we've had since 1990. And so we did $4,000 a unit renovations on there. On those properties, we raised the rents $15. So needless to say, we stopped doing renovations because that obviously wasn't going to stay. So it's all about the jobs, it's all about the income, and it's all about the quality of the resident.
Yeah, I just want one comment. As an appraiser, I have to go out on a limb here and say that I think we're maybe having some positive comments here as opposed to the last few meetings when it's been very negative. So I just want to commend our panel for being positive. I open it up to questions from the floor.
Going back to the beginning of the study, there were 3
segments of the population highlighted as incrementally growing as far as percentage of the Tucson population over the next 10 years. 35 to 20 to 30, or 30 to 35, and then 55 to 65, and 65 plus. And I know jobs are a big driver of income, but a lot of people that move to Tucson that make over $50,000 a year don't have jobs. They're not working anymore. So my question is, what percentage of the people renting Class A apartments in Tucson don't have jobs?
Do you mean that they're retired and they
Yes.
have pensions?
They're
That's what
retired. They don't want to maintain a home. They're retired. They just want to live where it's warm and have a nice place.
I would say there's some.
Yeah.
That's an exact number.
It's mostly people we see that have jobs that meet the credit criteria.
The vast majority of our new units, if I'm not mistaken, are employed. And by the way, they're not coming out of existing apartment complexes.
They're coming out of.
They're coming out somewhere else. Mobile homes, houses, moving to town, that kind of stuff. But they're not coming out of we're not taking people out of existing apartment complexes and putting them in new units, which is very surprising.
Okay, so the last question is by the appraiser, Paul.
Do you have any doubling up or households coming together in the A product, or larger units, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom?
That's a good point that I should have mentioned when you asked were there any surprises. I thought that we would have had way more roommates, and we're seeing very few. We see, just like a lot of anomalies, that we have been renting primarily to women. About 3/4 of our renters are women, and a lot of them will take a 3-bedroom and have one person living there. The 1-bedrooms will have 2 people living in a 1-bedroom and a single person in a 3. It just seems like there's way more anomalies today than there used to be. Back when we got started in the 70s and 80s in this business, it was really simple. Everybody was the same age. They wanted the same thing. They made the same amount of money. But today, you just get every manner of household formation, size, interests. Trying to outguess what their hobbies will be, how they'll spend their time is really fascinating. I'm super intrigued with what technology is doing, and after the crises that we went through with 911 and people stopping their habits of traveling, what have you, hunkering down, the quality of technology that you can get in your place today is just stunning. To be able to have a 60, 70-inch high-def flat panel TV with never-ending faster speeds. It gets to the point where you wonder why people go outside at all. It's so much more fun playing video games in their house, you know. So I just think it's really cool that there's so many patterns shifting so rapidly right now. We need an Uber apartment, I guess. You can offer your apartment for this weekend if you're not using it.
Great. Thank you so much for your
I
help.
have some unique ones.
All right, I want to thank Alan, Roger, Ron, Kim, and Freddie McAllister. Thank you very much. Byron, excellent job.